Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Reese Orman. I'm the CEO of NeuroGlow. And with us today is our lead integrative therapist, Trevor Bidstrup. Trevor, how you doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. And for an audience, this is a real treat today. We do these sessions for our Thrive members. We really want to equip you to have the best experiences as you go through ketamine assisted therapy. And today we thought let's pull the curtain back a little bit and share a little bit of Trevor's own personal experiences with ketamine infusions. And so we're excited to get in that topic. Before we do, I want to tell you just a little bit more about Trevor. So prior to working with us here at NeuroGlow, he was the director of the largest ketamine-assisted psychotherapy clinic in the Pacific Northwest. He's treated over 100 individuals using ketamine infusions, injections, and lozenges, and he serves on the therapist advisory panel for the ASKP3 board as board president and co-founder of the Professional Psychedelic Providers Association. So his practice is driven by genuine human connection, inspiration, and warmth, and research-supported decision-making, the understanding that wellness is unique to each individual's life and circumstance. So that is a little bit about Trevor. Man, thank you for being here and sharing, what this has been like for you personally. It's one thing to come in here as a therapist and help guide and educate and inform. But I'm eager to hear from you, Trevor, and what you've gained from your experiences in this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to. As a therapist working in this field, I like to mix in kind of a little bit of personal information just to kind of, draw out that connection we have as we go through the therapeutic process. I always like to say there's a lot of therapists out there that hide behind a clipboard, and I'm not one of those. I feel like if you're going to trust somebody and work with them closely, you got to know something about them. And my hope is that in sharing a little bit about my own experience with ketamine infusions, we might start to foster a closer connection with people that are interested in working together and also kind of shed light because although this treatment is growing in popularity, it's getting more and more common. There is a bit of a veil just as far as people not really understanding what happens, how does it work, what really goes on when you go through this treatment. And although my experience is my own and it's probably not the same for other people, my hope is that in talking about it a little bit today, maybe it'll reveal some of that information, make people a little more interested, a little more curious. And I always found it helpful. I think I have a really fortunate position given that I'm a therapist talking with people in this, just to hear about all these other different stories. And I've noticed different patterns and different kind of processes that people tend to go through. And although I won't be talking about other people in this presentation, maybe I can touch on a few of those things just as we talk about it today from my own perspective. But
Yeah.
I figured I'd maybe just jump in and kind of give a little background as far as like why I did this and when I did this and kind of put it all in context. So it was back in 2021. So going on about 4 years ago now at this point. Initially, I was working as a therapist for a number of years at that point. I was curious about ketamine assisted therapy. I've been getting ads targeting me all over the place. I ended up, funny enough, quitting a position, spending 2 months just diving into every single research article, every single book I could read on it. I really didn't know how to research wormhole. And I joked when I finally did end up signing up for the treatment series that I might be the most prepared client ever, just because I had spent so much time researching all of these things. And I began doing these infusions actually at the very beginning when I was hired on at that clinic that was mentioned earlier, at the one in the Pacific Northwest. And as I was going through this, I found myself kind of changing and adjusting how I work therapeutically with patients after I understood what it actually feels like to go through this treatment and the process and the emotional impact and frankly the emotional fatigue that can sometimes go along with this too, just given that so much stuff can come up. But it's going to be kind of a more loose presentation than I usually do. I'll just kind of leave on this next slide open in the background a few images. I found it really helpful as I was going through my treatment series to try to find a way. I'm not much of an artist, but find a way to capture, what I might see, what I might feel, what I might be going through. And one of the ways that I found helpful to do that was simply just to find images online and ones that seemed to capture moments or kind of aspects of my treatment. And so I imagine these images won't make any sense when I show them at first, but I'll touch on a few of them and it might give you a little bit of insight into kind of what I
Yeah.
went through and we can kind of talk through the process. But to put it in context, the reason why I went through treatment, I mentioned that, and I usually say like maybe 20% of the reason why I did it is because I was curious. I'm somebody where I have no interest in becoming a prescribing doctor because I want to be able to sleep at night knowing the medications I'm prescribing may be causing side effects that are worse than the original issue we're trying to treat. And so before I actually encourage any patient to go through this, I wanted to go through it myself. I wanted to understand, what is this? Is it safe? Is it effective? And when I began going through it, the other 80% of why I signed up was actually the result of a really difficult breakup that I had just gone through. I had been really involved with a woman. The long story short is that we had a pretty rough breakup, and it left me feeling kind of like a fraction of myself. If you've met me before for any intake calls, you probably heard me talk about goal setting. And one of the things that I had kind of established at the beginning of my treatment was that I knew myself well enough that I can't really measure mood across time. I'm pretty poor at it. I can't tell you what I had for dinner a week ago, let alone if I'm more happy or more sad. And so I began thinking about myself as far as what do I want to work on? How would I know this treatment works? Like what would actually happen for me? And I said things like I would be going to concerts more. I said I'd be going to the gym more. I'd be reaching out to friends more. And I began the beginning of treatment not doing those things. I was really isolating a lot. I was struggling with a lot of depression. That's always been kind of my mental health challenge that I battled up against. And through process of the series, I noticed that I never at once said, wow, I'm feeling way better. It's way different. But at the end, I had this realization of life looks completely different. And noticing that made me incredibly optimistic. And that all led to kind of why today I talk about ketamine treatments as being a getting unstuck tool. It's not necessarily a crossing the finish line tool, because in all honesty, there's pretty decent reasons why people are feeling the way they're feeling. And a lot of times those reasons and the circumstances in life aren't going to be instantly fixed or changed. And that's what I noticed for my treatment, is that when I got done, was everything peaches and cream and perfect? No. But I felt a different level of optimism and motivation to address those things. And I'm fortunate to say that since then, I haven't really noticed that degree of depression coming back. It's been really effective for me. But to start diving into all of this and kind of like talking about what I actually went through, I went through a 6 infusion series. It's actually the exact same protocol to the T that NeuroGlow does, although it happened to take place in Washington State instead of at NeuroGlow. And when I was going through these, I was a little bit worried because I was working. I was having like long days. I was developing a new program. I was creating a lot of content, creating policies and procedures. And then at the very end of my workday, I would end about an hour early and I would leave my office chair and move over to the infusion chair and I would get the treatments. And I was nervous that the work stress and that there were things required of me might be impacted by it, but I was pleasantly surprised to realize that, yeah, although it was quite strong during the infusion, metabolizes really, really, really quickly. I was always able to go back to work the next day. It didn't really impact my progress and things like that. But what I learned, and kind of as I began it, the first lesson I guess I picked up was how important intentions were. I initially was very skeptical of this as I began learning about ketamine. I thought it kind of sounded like a little woo-woo, a little well-wishing. I wasn't sure really how it worked. But it was really after my first infusion, which I kind of referenced in that black and white subway tunnel image in the top left. It really made me realize how important intentions were, because what I went into that treatment with is I was wanting to explore childhood trauma, which when I say that out loud, I realize how much I jumped in the deep end from the first infusion, but I'm beyond thankful I did. Because when I went through it, initially I was quite confused. I went through this infusion and I remember telling my therapist that I felt like I was in like a black and white, dark subway tunnel type situation. It wasn't literal, but that's just the feeling I got. And nothing happened. It was incredibly boring, is what I described it as. It was interesting that my mind created an image, but I didn't understand anything about it. I was really confused. Like, how could this be possibly related to my intention? It seemed disconnected entirely. But then when I met with my therapist afterward, she was talking, kind of echoing back what I was saying. She was like, "Oh, well, you're describing an experience where somebody was in a unexciting situation, nothing good, nothing bad." I had used the word painfully bland, I think, when I was talking about it with her. And in that conversation, I started to realize, oh, well, this actually relates quite a bit to my intention in the sense that, is there childhood trauma? No, there wasn't something hidden that I'd been suppressing or anything like that. Was it cheery and the happiest time of my life? No. But was it horrible? Also no. And the impact of that infusion was kind of quieting that questioning part of my mind that was curious, like, was there something hidden that I wasn't thinking about? And it was interesting because it was only through that discussion with the therapist that I arrived at that conclusion. In the moment, I was confused. Well, shouldn't have something come up? Shouldn't have something actually developed? But in fact, the absence of any of that was really valuable information. Kind of like if you were to get a medical screening and it comes back negative, and you realize, oh, this is what I don't have to work on. This is not a challenge I need to address right now. And so that's kind of how I began everything. I was pretty shocked after that first one, and it really inspired me to kind of dive into different types of intentions, which naturally led to the second treatment, which I kind of illustrate with that elevator looking image, because I went in there thinking about healing and recovering from the breakup. And what my experience was is for part of it, I always say I felt like an elevator, but again, this is not a literal, like I saw myself in a dream or something. It was quite abstract. I gave it the label of elevator because I felt as if I was in an enclosed space moving upward. I realize that for anybody that hasn't gone through this treatment, what I'm saying might start to sound a little bit crazy, but I imagine for those that have had an infusion, it might resonate a little bit more deeply too. But in this experience, I was going all the way up on this elevator, and then at a certain point, it came all the way crashing down, and it felt as if I was like going into a well, like not just back to surface level, but deeper than that. And again, I was pretty confused after that. I was like, well, that was a wild ride, a very interesting experience, but I'm not sure what it means for me. And then kind of the impact of that in therapy was talking about how, well, maybe this is a bit of an echo of what you've been going through. Riding the high highs. I just moved in with somebody. I was like really excited for the future. And then hitting these like low lows through the breakup. And it was interesting because despite this dramatic altitude change and everything else happening in the fusion, there wasn't any kind of like negative emotional impact to it. It was as if I could kind of see this process happening and just appreciate it as a change, which it was. And that noticing was actually really helpful as providing a way for me to reflect on the breakup process that I was also going through, realizing, okay, well, this is also a change. There is emotional stuff tied up with it, but I can also, at the same time, in addition to all of that, view it as a change and that I'm still okay and I'm making it through. And that's when I started to notice my fixation and like the negative thoughts related to the breakup dissipating a bit in my everyday kind of normal life outside of these infusions, outside of work. And from there, in all honesty, work stress picked up. And I was kind of nervous how that might impact my infusion treatments and the series. And there was actually one infusion that I used that kind of white orb to touch on this one, the third one. Um, there wasn't really a whole lot that I got out of this one, but what I really learned in this treatment that I think is interesting information to share with others is that we do 6 infusions for a reason. It's not that every single one is going to be full of these massive insights. It's completely normal to go through one of these, or maybe even multiple of these, and not have massive takeaways. But the thing I learned a lot about in this one was the impact that stress can have on this treatment. And it's why now I really encourage patients to get to the clinic a bit early, do a short meditation, go on a short walk up and down the street for a moment, like really try to get in that meditative headspace, because I genuinely believe that if I had done something like that during this infusion, it probably would have gone differently. It would have turned out a little different than it did. Instead, I noticed my mind really becoming kind of fixated on work stress. And although I didn't take much from that infusion itself, I noticed when I got home afterward, I wasn't feeling as emotionally anxious about all the work-related stress. And in that, I was able to see it a bit more clearly. And ultimately, it ended up with resolving all the stuff. There were some things going on at work that we were able to fix up. It was stressful that afternoon, and I think it did put a little bit of a shadow on the infusion. And also at the same point, it gave me a bit of space from it too. And with that space, I was able to kind of reapproach the problem with a bit of a fresh lens. And it turned out to be really helpful. And I was really thankful for that one. And at this point, I was halfway through. I've gone through 3 infusions. I was thinking to myself, well, we still have a long way to go, but it is interesting what's happening. And I also started to notice at this point that one of my goals was to go to the gym more. And after these infusions, I was not feeling safe to go lift heavy weights after kind of feeling out of it with the ketamine. And I was a little bit concerned that maybe life wasn't changing as much as I had originally wanted it to. And I was also noticing just how intensive this treatment can be. going through 2 infusions a week for 3 weeks. And at this point, I was at halfway through my second week. I began to realize like this is what my patients will be going through too, that a lot of stuff can come up really fast. If we're doing therapy after each of these infusions, this is like an intensive outpatient program in some ways. This is a robust treatment that's kind of encouraging you and inviting you to think on your life and go to emotional spaces and have hard conversations. And I was infinitely thankful for my therapist during the time for holding space and kind of allowing me to process and talk through this and to be curious with me. And that's directly translated into how now I want to show up as a therapist. I don't want to pretend that I know the answers to all of life's problems. I don't think I could have necessarily solved all of my problems, so to speak, even at that point in time. But having a curious and open and inspired attitude was what allowed me to kind of break through. And that's kind of how it translates to my practice today. I try to create that sort of environment for the people that I'm working with as well. But this all led up to the fourth treatment, which you'll notice there's only 5 images on the screen, and that's because the fourth one, it was surprisingly absent of most of the qualities that I had occurred previously. There was no visual experience. I didn't really find myself thinking, so to speak, about anything. The only thing I could tell my therapist afterward, and I felt a bit embarrassed because I was hoping I would have more information to discuss. All I said is, I don't know why, but I felt an overwhelming sense of love. I said it reminded me of if you were laying down next to somebody you cared about being held. And it felt safe and it felt warm and it felt comforting. And I remember telling my therapist, well, that was really nice. I really enjoyed that experience. It felt good. But what do I make of this? But like, what does this actually mean for me? And in our appointment, we kind of dove into, well, after feeling that, like, what has it done for you? Like, was going through that experience, was having that feeling of value, and has it had influence moving forward afterward? And I started to realize that actually, yeah, like I was smiling a bit more. I was feeling a bit more positive. And on one hand, I wanted to negate it as like an artificial experience. It wasn't genuine, maybe it wasn't real. But at the same time, I had to recognize, well, the emotional impact was, and the way it's changing my mood since then is, it is real. And so that one kind of surprised me. And it also opened my eyes to the reality that I kind of growing up, hearing about, psychedelics and things from others, I was always kind of under the impression that visuals, the thing that I didn't experience in this infusion, were dependent on dose. That if you have the right enough dose, then you'll have the right style of visuals. And I was blown away that after 4 treatments, the first 3 were all visual and the fourth one wasn't. And this was the highest dose yet. And I was really confused by that. And this is when I really started to learn that dose, it can allow that sort of an experience to take place, but it doesn't necessitate it. There's a near infinite number of factors that create the style of psychedelic experience we go through. And now that's really translated in my practice years later because it allows me to be compassionate and also to kind of alert people of this. The reality is that having these psychedelic experiences is so fine-tuned to so many qualities of yourself, to what you're going through, even to your current mood. There's so many knobs that can be turned, so to speak. And dose is certainly one of those knobs. But this really revealed to me that it's not the most important one, and it's not going to overshadow all of those. Dose can be a valuable thing, but at the same time, it's not the whole story. And it started to let me kind of realize how much of an impact my mind has on my perception, how much impact my history and my experiences influence how I see the world and go about my life. And that led then to the fifth infusion. And I feel like these last 2 are the ones that I became the most curious and was most confused by initially. The fifth one, you might notice the image from Interstellar. They call it the Tesseract in that movie. It's that top image on the right-hand side of kind of an astronaut with all the lines around him. I was actually laughing to myself. I might even have it over here. So I got in the habit of after each of my treatments using this journal and kind of recording things that I had thought about. Today, years later, I provide people that I work with a bit of like a journal prompt style thing to kind of encourage them to reflect on their experiences. Back then, I was kind of just going through and doing it in my journal, but I laugh and I wanted to share this because I don't know if it'll pop up well, but you might see this little guy with squiggly lines around him. I actually hadn't seen Interstellar at this point in time, but
Yeah.
I felt as if I was a guy in this like room full of squiggly lines, and it made me feel really lost. And this was one of the infusions where it got a little bit scary, to be honest with you. I had this feeling of like I am losing my sense of self. I don't know if I'm going to come back. I felt a little bit frightened even at part of this infusion. And the most powerful, I guess, realization from all of this is when I came back, the nurse working with me recorded that the first thing I said after the infusion was, I didn't think I was going to come back from that one for a second. Like it
Yeah.
really did shake me. But in the therapy call after, we talked a lot about how, well, what was it like to be fearful that you wouldn't come back, you wouldn't bounce back, and then to realize that here, in fact, you have, despite that worry, despite an incredibly unfamiliar situation, here you are, and you're still okay. And that was one of the moments where I started to, I mean, even talking about it now, it kind of gives me a little bit of goosebumps, just like realizing how strangely, bizarrely fitting it was to my exact circumstance
Yeah.
that I was trying to get back to myself after this breakup, and that despite everything feeling like it had shattered and all my plans had kind of changed, here I was, and I was still okay. And then obviously about a year later, I watched the movie, and when I watched that scene, I was like, oh, this is so bizarre. That feels so familiar. It feels almost exactly like what I had went through. And now I love to kind of reference that scene just because it's such a neat capture in pop culture of
Sure.
something I had gone through and experienced.
This is incredible, Trevor. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
sharing that. I have
yeah,
had very similar to that interstellar shot there, some of my most intense infusions where I feel like I've been able to get some of the best work done internally. I've had similar visuals to it, and I'm like taken back by it as I will reflect on it later that day and then the days after it of like, wow, I was very, very deep in there. What did that mean? A lot of times I get a similar takeaway to what you spoke to, which is like for me, being an entrepreneur and kind of type A personality and being someone that's always in control and has to have control, I've found this is a space where I have to relinquish control and let the medicine do its work to set a space for me to do my work, right? And
yeah,
so it's been really profound for that. I wanted to go back to you talked about your first
yeah,
session there and that kind of emptiness or that just
yeah,
difference in what you were kind of expecting. And like, I felt that as well as far as, this is and quite a lot to take on if you're not familiar with psychedelics or have never, explored this before. Your first infusion is going to be an immersive experience. And um, my first one actually left me kind of a little unsure of like what was the takeaway from that. And I think it goes
yeah,
to my point and yours though is just really the importance of having that support system there, because I got with you and did integrative therapy actually after that first and second session, and was able to not only take away more from each individual session, but there was a linking of themes or like a continuity between those that I may have missed. And so just wanted to ask you, like, it
yeah,
sounds like that integrative therapy you were doing during your infusion series was, significantly helpful in terms of like your full takeaway from this. And I know that's something you advocate for. Did you want to speak on that a little bit more about what you've seen,
yeah,
not only with you, but with some of the patients maybe that you've worked with when it comes to this?
yeah. It's interesting because we talk about this ketamine assisted therapy as being like a process style therapy, like it's something you go through. It's not like you get one bit of information, everything is great. And I think sometimes when people read about ketamine treatments, they almost think that they're going to have the psychedelic experience where they wake up, see a big billboard that says, you need to stop drinking, or some kind of blunt
Yeah.
answer. It's not that way. It's interesting because the mind works when we're going through these processes in really bizarre ways. And having somebody that was equipped and experienced and skilled in working in this area was completely the make or break difference for me, in all honesty, going through this. Because something that she could do, my old therapist, was that she could see this and she could point out patterns. And she could point out, well, it sounds like what you were describing is you went through this. And almost like I went through it. I think I referenced maybe a session or two ago in this presentations, the director's chair as kind of a way of viewing it from a third person perspective to reflect on the experience and get different types of information from it. And that was, I think, one of the lessons that I really learned from my therapist when I went through this was that she could provide that third person perspective much more easily than I could initially reflect on it. Because she's hearing it and she's appreciating that I was a character in the play, is kind of the analogy I use. But she could see the whole play. It's like it reminds me a little bit of people that are very into like cinema, for example. You can watch a movie and appreciate like, oh, it was beautiful, there was good characters, it made me feel this. But sometimes people that are very into cinema, they can see like plots and
Right.
arcs and kind of see like another layer to the movie that's not initially apparent. And that sort of observation is something that a therapist can be really helpful for in this process too, is that you went through it and you'll have initial reactions, but sometimes having the film buff, if you will, or having somebody
Yeah.
kind of look at it and capture other nuances is really helpful. And I've noticed with a lot of patients, that's kind of a thing that I try to do and bring into the sessions as well, is to be curious and be like, well, have you thought about it from this side? If you kind of take the you out of it, so to speak, what are we left with? What was this story and does the story hold meaning? Because there's a researcher out of Imperial College London, Robin Carhart Harris, and he talks a lot about how psychedelics seem to reveal things related to why we started suffering, what's perpetuating the suffering, or what might be helpful to resolve the suffering. And that's, I think, a lot of what these psychedelic experiences can tell us because it's created by you. It's something unique to yourself. It's generated by you. Like you cannot get a more personalized, tailored form of therapy than one that your mind is creating. And the goal of the therapist is not to create a second therapy, but rather to like, let's learn from this one that's happening in your brain. Let's learn from this experience and be curious about it and, try on different shoes, try on different theories and hypotheses about it. So I guess that's kind of, a very long-winded way of answering it, but that's what I've noticed. Yeah.
As you're saying that, Trevor, I'm thinking to myself too, I think for a lot of people when they come into their first infusion series, the notion of being able to recall memories or traumatic experience or hard times and not have this, complete transformation of your, fight or flight system and all the emotional baggage that comes with it,
Yeah.
that's a new thing. So it's something that once you get comfortable with that, to Trevor's point on the director's chair, you're able to go in with the right setting. And if there's an event, a trauma, a situation that you need to heal from, your brain's going to let it come out and you're going to be able to process it, and you will be able to process this in ways that are not accessible outside of this psychedelic arena. I'm not quite
Yeah.
sure how else to explain it. And that was a big deal for me and very surprising for me, was that I could go through, live through some of these challenges and see it from that perspective. And, to back up Trevor's point too, you're not going to go into these sessions and it be, the cure all, and there's going to be this billboard that says you need to do X, Y, Z, but it is going to let the platform open. It's going to let your brain nudge you and tell you kind of what you need to do, and then it's going to be on you to do that work. And um, it's just such a profound thing, and it doesn't happen overnight. But for me too, in my experience going through these infusions,
Mhm.
that enthusiasm for life, it starts to pick up, and you'll
Yeah.
notice that, like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, whoa, I'm now exercising, or I am not dreading this event that I have to go to, or hey, I was able to handle this conflict or this difficult time with much more composure and poise than I probably historically would have had. And it's that is what we see time and time again with patients. We see them picking
Yeah.
up old hobbies, picking up old relationships. They begin painting again, becoming active, taking care of themselves. Even just their physical aura, their body posture, their face, the micro expressions of their
Mhm.
face. All of these things change over time. This is an incredible opportunity that this modality gives us here. And so, with that, Trevor, as we wrap up here, if you yeah, I would imagine we'll have some current patients, future patients, and we'll have people that are completely new to ketamine assisted therapy that are going to end up watching this video at some time, if you could give a word of advice to someone that is outside of this community that's never experienced it, but is interested in it, maybe they've had some traumas or they have some things they know that they'd want to work on, become a better version of themselves, what kind of guidance would you give them in regards to this and where to start and how to consider
Yeah.
this?
I mean, I guess there's two things that come to mind. Number one is that, and I find myself reflecting on this and thinking about it a lot. It was really apparent in my treatment series. I noticed it being incredibly apparent in a lot of the work that I do with patients as well. And that's that if your conscious mind could have solved all the problems that you're in right now and the challenges you're facing, I wouldn't be talking to you. We wouldn't be in this situation. We're in this situation because we're stuck. And there's a lot of good reasons why people get stuck. It's not an assessment of your character, who you are. But this treatment can be helpful because it's going to allow you to see your unconscious mind a little bit, which this is valuable because it's not the thing that we usually operate from, but it's a huge part of us. It impacts us in a lot of different ways. I mean, there's a lot of theories of how it influences dreams, for example. There's a lot of theories about how it influences behavior and thoughts and emotions and reactivity and all of these things. But this treatment is such a useful tool to learning about that side of us. And if I had to summarize it all, like this is a learning treatment. We're learning new things about ourselves and it's coming from us. And with that information, we can change how we show up in the future and how we move forward in life after treatment. And the other part is take this preparation serious. As we're going through this treatment, that's one of the reasons why I really have enjoyed and am happy to be partnering with NeuroGlow and working with y'all is because there's such an emphasis and importance on making sure there's safety, making sure there's preparation, making sure that there's a strong therapeutic component before people go into treatment so that we can go into it informed. We can go into it with the understanding that, hey, maybe I should be looking to learn new information about myself instead of just expecting that I get an infusion and everything feels great. It's not a happy pill. That's an artificial high. That's not what we're going for. We're going for actual change and actually showing FOA change in the future. I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling a bit, but this is kind of what I'm thinking on.
This is
This
great.
is what I believe in.
Well, thank you so much, Trevor. We appreciate your time. And yeah, for anyone that's interested, would like to learn more about ketamine assisted therapy, please reach out to myself or Trevor. Do you have there we go. Reach out to Trevor at Psychothera. We'd be more than happy to help you here at NeuroGlow as well. We are DFW's leading ketamine assisted therapy clinic with locations in Flower Mound, Fort Worth, and McKinney. So that concludes our session for today. I want to thank everyone that joined us here. I hope that you were able to get some takeaways from this. If you've ever considered this type of therapy, please do a little research. And if there's anything we can do to help you on that journey, don't hesitate to reach out. Hope you guys have an excellent rest of your day, and we will be back next month with more information from this realm. You'll have a great day. Thanks. Bye.